Hello and welcome back to Dukascopy TV. Today I'm joined in the studio once again by David Smith, author of the Geneva Business Insider, and we're talking the latest deal from the IMF. David, thank you once again for joining me in the studio.
Pleasure to be with you once again, thank you.
Now, I just wanted to ask you about this latest IMF deal to try and get Greece out of its debt. And how fair is it on other countries that are also in debt, such as Ireland?
Well, obviously it is discriminatory and unfair to Ireland. I mean, Ireland have assumed full responsibility for their debts, which they basically had dumped on them by a government who, to my view, betrayed the country in doing so. You have private banks taking private risks, and all of a sudden the taxpayer is made to pay for it. And so far they have honoured their obligations, and there's been a great deal of suffering in the country, people finding themselves in the street, social services being reduced, etc. So Ireland has every reason to complain if Greece is given a sweeter deal.
And in your opinion, do you think that Ireland will go the same way as Greece and seek a similar sort of packet?
Well, they'd be silly not to. I mean, they were silly to get in the situation in the first place, but if there's someone being given an easy option way out, then they should actually line up to do the same thing. And let's not forget that there are many other countries which could be looking for the same kind of options either right away, like Portugal, or in a very short space of time, like Spain and Italy.
But don't you think it's a little bit dangerous to link Ireland to a country like Greece in the eyes of investors? Why
should that be dangerous? I mean, to me, the investors can make up their own mind. I mean, if it were me, I would be making my own judgments, and I think we need to get away from the idea that people should be protected from the consequences of their acts and decisions.
I see. And what do you see for the future of Ireland's economy going into 2013?
I would have thought Ireland is not in such a bad position. It still has a fairly strong economy. The people work, they're industrious, their financial sector is doing quite well. The trouble is they've just got a mountain of debt which they've assumed, which they should never have assumed. And the problem is, no matter how hard you try, you cannot actually pedal and get your way out of that without paying for a very, very long time.
I see. Now, David, we've got another question for you, but this question actually comes from another one of our guests, and it's on the same subject, so let's take a listen.
Very good.
I've got a question regarding the Greek debt. Each semester, each term, we try to propose a new plan to rescue Greece, but it's on a very short-term basis. And I wonder if this approach is really sustainable in the long term.
So would you agree?
I think that's a very sensible question. I mean, the reality is that there's absolutely no desire to actually solve the problem long term. You have a country which has driven itself into levels of debt which are completely unsustainable, and all that is happening with every bailout that comes along is not that the country is getting bailed out, but the banks that invested money in that country are getting bailed out. So nothing of that money, or most marginal part of it, ends up actually in the pockets of the Greek people. Now, the Greek economy itself, the only solution is, according to Mrs. Merkel, just to as they say in German, marschieren nicht regenerieren, which means keep on marching and don't think too much. They're expected to cut costs beyond sustainable levels. The major issue is that the level of debt is unsustainable and the solutions that are applied are unrealistic. And it's a little bit like having a ship with a great big hole in it, where it's about to sink and you bail it out for a few minutes, but you never fix the hole. And the only way the hole can genuinely be fixed, I think, is by Greece getting out of the euro, getting into setting up a new currency, adjusting its currency and its interest rates to the real market conditions that exist there, and leaving the West and the banks to go whistle for their debts. Now that, I think, is only right, because it is, after all, the corrupt politicians and the corrupt bankers that have manoeuvred them into this situation in the first place. And it just seems totally unrealistic for this country to ever get out of the hole otherwise.
I see. Well, let's have a listen to Emmanuel's point of view and see if it matches up with your own.
Yeah, my point is that the way we're dealing with Greece is absurd. Financially, economically, we should be able, in fact, to help Greece, and never forget that when we're in crisis like we're today, we start with a financial crisis, then an economical crisis, and finally a social crisis. I definitely think that business, commerce, is the best way to handle such a crisis and not war. And the way we are addressing that Greek crisis is not the right way, meaning we're criticizing them, but they're really part of Europe.
So would you agree, could this become more of a social problem?
I think inevitably it will, and there is absolutely no sense of responsibility for what's happening in Greece being showed by the EU politicians. The tragedy of all this is they can watch on television people rioting in the streets, protesting, shooting themselves, committing suicide in hospitals without the proper medication, and fly off in their private jets paid for by the taxpayer and ask for a 5% increase in their budget or more, which at least our Prime Minister says he doesn't want to do, although he'll be overridden, obviously. This is really Animal Farm at its very best, where some are more equal than others, and this really has to stop. Otherwise it ends up in the streets, it ends up in riots and social disintegration. And Greece is not that far away from it, and if you look at Spain, I'm pretty sure that Mr. Rajoy, the Prime Minister of Spain, is only too well aware that all he has to do is stop the social benefit payments to the 50% youth unemployed, and he'll have the same thing there.
Well, David, thank you so much for your insights. Just lastly, before I let you go, I want to ask you the Dukascopy question.
Right.
So I know that you've answered this question before, but we ask every guest that comes into the studio, if you had $1 million to invest in the market for a year, where would you put it and why? Now, last time we talked about gold, so will you choose the same this time? Let's have a look.
Yeah, I would still take gold, but I'd observe a few things about gold. We are actually living in a period in history where everything is manipulated, absolutely everything. And it starts with interest rates, it starts with the stock market, it starts with liquidity, and it also applies to gold and silver. In this great balance, there is a desire by the central banks to make sure that people do not invest in gold, and you see regular manipulation where markets drop 3% in 3 minutes because there has been a dumping of gold onto the futures market on enormous scales. Like a few days ago, $5 billion worth of gold was dumped on the market in less than 5 minutes, and hence the price goes down. But this is nothing more than an attempt to manipulate the market by the major bullion banks and the central banks in order to keep people out of gold and into the worthless paper that these governments are printing, or into an inflated stock market which is manipulated upwards by the big banks every day, where actually if you look at the number of genuine investors, they're basically dried up entirely. And these manipulations of gold that go on are most particularly done over holiday weekends. They are done at unusual times in the day after the closure of the main markets. They are done just before announcing the non-farm payroll labour statistics, and they are done before Mr. Bernanke, or even when Mr. Bernanke is actually speaking. So anyone looking at all of this should be asking themselves a question: why, despite all these attacks, which are very systematic and very planned, is gold still rising? And what would actually happen to gold if the market were a fair, true, open market and not a fraudulent, manipulated market?
Well, David, thank you so much for your insights and coming into the studio to join us once again.
Pleasure, thanks a lot.
That's all from us here in the Dukascopy studio, but make sure you click back to the website for more interviews and updates.